Welcome to Ayurveda and Spirituality with your host, Alakananda Ma, a renowned Ayurvedic expert and a graduate of a top London medical school. She is the principal of Alundi Ayurveda Gurukula, a unique apprenticeship-style school in Boulder, Colorado. She is a spiritual mother, teacher, flower essence maker, and storyteller. Join us as we uncover the timeless principles of Ayurveda, discover practical tips for enhancing vitality, and explore the deeper dimensions of spirituality that intertwine with the ancient science of life.
So welcome everyone. Welcome to satsang. Satsang is a meeting of hearts, a gathering of friends to inquire into the truth. The truth. Today we are going to inquire into just that: truth, lies, and disinformation living in the post-truth era, which I promised I would do, and I spent a chunk of Sunday morning getting prepared to fulfill this promise because we talked about Satya and the importance of doing what we said we'd do. So I'm going to start with a quote from Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn. I'm not sure if that's an author you're familiar with. He did win the Nobel Lit Prize in 1970, and his book, The First Circle, was published in English, I think by Simon and Schuster, in 1968 when I was a teenager, and we all read it. And now that I'm a grown-up, we were all like super enthused about Solzhenitsyn at the time. Now that I'm a grown-up and so on, I'm not sure that if I really like align with all his viewpoints. But he certainly revealed a lot of the repression that was happening in the Soviet Union at the time. And he famously said, "We know that they are lying, the government. They know that they are lying. They even know that we know they are lying. We also know that they know we know they are lying too. They, of course, know that we certainly know they know we know. They, of course, know that we certainly know they know we know they are lying too as well. But they are still lying in our country. The lie has become not just moral category, but the pillar industry of this country." Unfortunately, those words written about the Soviet Union might now start to be sounding almost too familiar to us today. I grew up on the quote, "What is truth?" said jesting Pilate, and would not stay for answer, which is by Francis Bacon. It goes back to what's happening in John's Gospel when Jesus is brought before Pilate. And in response to Pilate's questions, he said, "For this I came into the world, to bear witness to the truth." And Pilate flips him off, saying, "What is truth? It depends what men mean by truth," and goes on to the next thing. So there's more interesting stuff in that same essay on truth by Francis Bacon. To pass from theological and philosophical truth, which he was talking about earlier in his essay, to the truth of civil business, it will be acknowledged even by those that practice it not, that clear and round dealing is the honor of man's nature, and that mixture of falsehood is like alloy in coin of gold and silver, which may make the metal work the better, but it embaseth it. For these winding and crooked courses are the goings of the serpent, which goes basely on his belly, and not on the feet. There is no vice that doth so cover a man with shame as to be found false and perfidious. And therefore Montaigne saith prettily, so this is now Ma quoting Francis Bacon, who is quoting Montaigne. Montaigne said prettily, when he inquired the reason of why the word of the lie should be such a disgrace and such an odious charge, saith he, Montaigne. If it be well weighed, to say that a man lieth is as much to say that he is brave toward God and a coward toward man. For a lie faces God and shrinks from man. Surely the wickedness of falsehood and breach of faith cannot possibly be so highly expressed, in that it shall be the last peal to call the judgments of God upon the generations of men, it being foretold that when Christ cometh, he shall not find faith upon the earth. So the worst thing we can be doing is lying, because then we're really mocking God, because God knows the truth. And it's the last peal to call the judgment of God upon generations of men that we lie. So we have always lied, and politicians have always lied, and rumors and falsehoods have always spread. But something has shifted. Something has shifted because before we tended to think more in alignment with Francis Bacon and Montaigne, that lying is like a bad thing and that truth is like good. And that if we lie, we're actually sinning or doing something bad. And that if we're going to lie, as you were alluding to last week, you're not going to get caught. So once you start lying, you get caught in a web of lies. So better to tell the truth than get caught in this web of lies, of what a tangled web we weave when once we practice to deceive. Because somewhere we're going to be held accountable, right? For our lies, right? Truth, misinformation, and disinformation were nailed up upon the church doors and pinned up in the squares, and were spread by the women at the well and the men on the front line. There's always been gossip, there have always been lies, there have always been rumors, there's always been misinformation and disinformation, but something changed. And it changed exactly in June of 2016. And the day that I knew something had changed, I had jet lag. We had flown into the UK, actually on the day of the Brexit referendum, in which I was not allowed to vote. I can vote there now postally, but that's been a change. I wasn't allowed to vote in the referendum. There were floods all over East Anglia. It must have made it impossible for many people to get to the polls to cast their vote. We barely made it from Heathrow to Ipswich, where we had come to scatter Mum's ashes. So because Mum and Dad had died and the house was sold, we woke up in the morning in a bed and breakfast run by a couple from Malawi. It's kind of the ultimate irony that I go to my hometown, not a bed and breakfast, a Airbnb. I go to my hometown and I'm staying in an Airbnb, one run by a beautiful couple from Malawi and their children. And I wake up in my small room in the morning and I've got to know the result of the referendum. And I like peer my bleary jet lag eyes open because, the 7 hour time difference is pretty significant. And did I read it right? Oh my God. We're going to leave the EU? This is crazy. The television was going nonstop on the BBC about this catastrophe of leaving the EU. But what was so notable about this situation was that the Brexit campaign was entirely built on lies and falsehoods. And there was no truth in it. Or maybe, I mean, there were like crazy pictures of like hor hordes of, um, I think large numbers of Syrians trekking through Europe because they had been granted the opportunity for asylum, and like these people are going to invade us. There were buses driving from town to village with lies on the side of them. It was lies upon lies. And when this happened in June of 2016, I knew that Trump was going to get elected, and I was right. Because I knew that his campaign, which was also based and built on lies and falsehoods and disinformation, would win for the same mysterious reasons that Brexit won, but I didn't understand as yet what the reasons were, because I didn't know enough back then about how disinformation spreads. But then there was this extremely bizarre thing that happened. As we all know, the predecessor of Trump won, was Barack Obama. And as we all know, the first inauguration of Barack Obama was historically well attended because he was America's first black president. And if you were African American, you wanted to be there. You wanted to be there to see that day. And as we all know, after the campaign of lies, smears, misinformation, and disinformation, and the chance to build the wall and lock her up, that the inauguration of Trump was quite poorly attended. And we all know that Sean Spicer came out and said that it was announced about what an enormous crowd it was, the biggest crowd, which was patently untrue. And you might remember the president's counselor, Kellyanne Conway, saying, no, he wasn't lying. He was giving alternative facts. So that moment when Kellyanne Conway used that word, alternative facts, ushered in the post-truth era. It ushered in a time when facts no longer mattered, when truth became secondary to point of view. We were the unfortunate ones who lived through that moment. There is a quote that is attributed to Thomas Jefferson, but I haven't been able to validate that Thomas Jefferson ever wrote it anywhere, but maybe he said it. But it is that a well-informed citizenry is the best defense against tyranny. Yeah. It's an important quote, whoever said it. We all know it's true. But we all know that people act based on the information they have. And that in order to maintain democracy, we have to have a well-informed citizenry because democracy depends on people casting votes. And we don't want people casting their votes based on a campaign of lies, as we saw in June of 2016. So let's just break apart two words, misinformation and disinformation, because they're sometimes used interchangeably, but their meanings are importantly different. So misinformation is false or inaccurate information, getting our facts wrong. It's it's all those stories on Facebook. There was the story about the woman with Down syndrome who became the single mother of the first female astronaut who wasn't, but the person named didn't even exist. And it was a kind of a really, really fake story because the truth of being someone with Down syndrome is that you actually need to be supported for your daily life. You're not going to be raising a scientist as a single mother. You're just not going to be. It's not fair to pretend that. It's denying the fact of living with Down syndrome and needing support for your everyday life, because that's the reality. So these kind of stories on Facebook are being spread all the time. And generally I would categorize them as misinformation. Like maybe someone wanted to write an inspiring story, and then other people are sharing it and saying, look, this really happened, but it didn't. Satyananda was looking at something on YouTube yesterday and showing a woman being dragged off a plane, and he's like, it says this really happened. I'm like, but it's being filmed, professionally filmed, and that is not a plane, and those are actors. And after considering it for a few more minutes, it was a training video for air marshals, showing them how to, stay calm, get the woman off the plane, which wasn't a plane, it was a small set with a few seats, and make sure you don't leave her luggage behind. Bring her luggage with her. But why is this woman being dragged off a plane? She wasn't. It was a play. So we all do misinformation, and if we do it and then we realize, oh, I'll say to you, I said such and such, but I found out that's not true. It's this, right? We have to try to be accurate. Disinformation is false information deliberately intended to mislead. So between misinformation and disinformation, just think about it, what we've been living through before and especially since 2016. Climate change. All this both-sidism that somehow pretends that the supposed opinions of a handful of scientists well-funded by the oil and gas industry is equal to the considered opinion of 98% of the world's climate scientists. Right? That's disinformation. One of our friends got completely caught up in it. I would love to be able to believe that climate change isn't real. I would feel so much better about the great niece's futures. But it's not true. Scientists are telling us that climate change is real, and my own daily life experience validates that. And I see my microclimate here in my garden changing year by year upon year, decade upon decade. So then 2020 happened, and the pandemic happened. And suddenly, epidemiologists and public health officials and doctors knew what it was like to be a climate scientist. They're having the same experience, that they're telling us the truth and it's getting denied. No, there's no pandemic. It was a lab leak, blah, blah, whatever. And vaccines are bad. And it's going on and on. It's getting worse and worse and worse. And our ability to maintain a stable democracy. A lot of the disinformation that we saw being spread from 2016 on was simply being spread by Russian actors to create dissension and conflict in our country. Like actual fake protests and things. So there's misinformation and there's disinformation. And if you click and you spread something that's actually disinformation, for your part, it's misinformation. Because you think it's true when you click. So fact check before you click. Think before you click. Think before you share. Like I said earlier, we've always spread misinformation and disinformation by gossip, by proclamation, by whatever means we had. It's not really new, but we don't know how to work this new thing we've got, the social media, and even worse, the AI. Like you look at anything now and like, is it real or is it AI? Like, did that really happen or not? You don't know. But the algorithms of social media reward clicks and attention. And so bad actors can leverage that to spread disinformation and have their between trolls and bots, disinformation can go viral. And that's the missing piece that Satyananda and I did not understand in 2016. We didn't know how it worked. But in the subsequent year or two, we thoroughly learned how that works. That there are trolls and bots who you can see they're all kind of spreading the same thing but with a different name. Once the disinformation is out there, you can spread it with a click. So check, get off of whatever social media you use. There's a Snopes, that's a great way to fact check. Or just seeing if, like sometimes Sarananda would ask me, like, did this actually happen? And I was like, well, if it actually happened, it would be in the papers, right? And it wasn't. It wasn't in the newspapers. Not a big thing, like protesters set fire to Netanyahu's home. That would have been in the papers if it actually happened. It was uh, it was a lie for clicks. I wanted to look a bit at a paper, Beyond Misinformation, Understanding and Coping with the Post-Truth Era. The author is Stefan Lewandowski, because he said it really well. He starts he starts the paragraph that I started with. Imagine a world that's had enough of experts, that considers knowledge to be elitist. This is what was driving climate scientists crazy. Then this is what was driving doctors and public health officials and epidemiologists crazy. You dedicate your life to a certain subject, and suddenly that's just elitist. And even recently, our health secretary said relying on science is dogmatism. Wait a minute, what? We don't have to believe the science. I didn't ever think that I would have to have a yard sign that says science is real. But I have a yard sign that says science is real. He says an opinion market on Twitter that determines whether a newly emergent strain of avian flu is really contagious to humans, or whether greenhouse gas emissions do in fact cause global warming. Uh, that is the world that we don't want to imagine, but that we live in. So the powerful in this world are the influencers, the ones who are the most vocal and influential on social media, including tweet bots. I guess they're not called tweet bots anymore because tweets are not tweets and Twitter's not Twitter anymore, but fake people. There are fake people working for the Russian government, pretending to be people here. So a small group of operatives can create an illusion of widespread opinion. So we have actually come into this post-truth world in which experts are seen as untrustworthy or elitist. And we should, we're there for the little guy, but the people who say they're there for the little guy are incredibly rich and privileged. uh, they leverage the prejudices of the uninformed. We need that informed citizenry. So misinformation misinforms. And not only does misinformation misinform us, so, well, maybe climate change isn't real. Like I said, I would love to be able to believe that climate change isn't real. I'd sleep better at night if I could believe that. If I could feel happier about the great niece's future. But facts are facts. Uh, so uh, the worst problem is that it gets to the point where we don't believe in facts at all. And the example that this author gives is, um, quote, many scientists and policymakers urge us to take action to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and then do a both sides. Some scientists testifying at congressional hearings are quick to point out that the world hasn't actually warmed in the last decade. Which there was like that time that I forget which politician it was, came with a snowball into Congress and said, look, there's no such thing as global warming because here's this snowball. So this next sentence is a little difficult to understand. I mean, it's using a lot of philosophical language, but let's try. We're now facing a situation in which a large share of the populace is living in an epistemic space that has abandoned conventional criteria of evidence, internal consistency, and fact-seeking. So that is basically saying we're living in a post-truth era in which we don't care about evidence, in which you no longer need to worry about weaving your web of lies so that one lie doesn't cancel another, because nobody cares if the lies cancel each other out. They'll believe them all. So he then says it follows that the current state of public discourse can no longer be examined through the lens of misinformation that can be debunked, but as an alternative reality that is shared by millions. People, I mean, I find it upsetting at UNGA, the UN General Assembly, when certain people just stood up and told things that were lies from beginning to end. Demonstrable, provable lies. If all genocide experts, including at least 3 Israeli human rights organizations, all say there's a genocide in Gaza, and you just want to say, no, there isn't. Or this is anti-Semitism, which it contradicts the definition of anti-Semitism. If anyone that agrees with me is a communist or an anti-Semite or whatever you want to have as a label of being really bad, then we live in this disinformation bubble. We now inhabit a post-truth world. Well, we don't need to have a coherent model of reality. So you don't need to worry about a web of lies because there's no longer a coherent model of reality. We live in a world where facts no longer matter, or we don't acknowledge the existence of the facts. Let's look at flat Earth. My grandmother, my grandmother my nanny, was deaf. She can't remember when she wasn't deaf. Apparently, she became deaf at 3 and never got any special education. So I don't know what she learned in school. Well, she did definitely learn to read and write and do arithmetic, and I don't know how she accomplished that. But she did it. Left school at 14 to go work in a factory. Made best friends with the gal next to her at the factory bench, who moved to Vancouver. So after Nanny's retirement, she got on a plane and she flew to Vancouver, and she came back and she said, I have found out that the earth is flat like a plate. Because when I flew to Vancouver, I did not fly around, I flew straight. And we tried and we tried and we tried to explain it to her, or to convince her that the earth was round, but she had seen with her own eyes, she said, that the earth was flat. She didn't have a way, because of not having received any special ed for being deaf, despite being, I'm sure, very intelligent. She didn't have a way to put it together to understand what we were trying to tell her. But there are loads and loads of people who've decided to believe the earth is flat, contrary to all possible evidence. Or who've decided to believe that the moon landing was a hoax. Oh, it just goes on and on and on. So we can choose our own reality. I want to live in a world where the earth is flat. Okay, when we get up in the morning, we don't experience living on a round earth, right? We experience the sun rising and setting. So, but the objective fact is that the earth is flat. Let's remember the Copernican revolution, and that it was considered heresy to say that the earth went around the sun and not vice versa. Whoa. Galileo Galilei was only of late forgiven and rehabilitated and apologized to posthumously for pointing out that the earth goes around the sun and not vice versa. So we can pick our own reality, where facts and objective evidence, the author says, are trumped by existing beliefs and prejudices. This can be amplified by leaders who model deception and delusion as adequate means to garner support in this world. Lying is not only accepted, it is rewarded. Falsifying reality is no longer about changing people's beliefs. It is about asserting power. And, it goes to all these things, like trying to get us to believe that immigrants, as long as they're brown and speak Spanish, are the cause of all our troubles, etc. We can create a reality and get people to follow along with us as we hurtle into fascism. So this is the world that we live in. And living in this world, let us think before we click. And if you see something and it doesn't quite compute, go off of that site, go somewhere else and check that fact. Actual reporters in actual networks and papers have master's degrees and PhDs in the subject that they're reporting on. They are trained to consider, they are trained to be objective. Maybe they deserve to be listened to sometimes, more than the person next door who has an opinion. So it's a hard one for us to navigate, and I don't know where it's going. I find it incredibly frustrating to be in a post-truth era. because truth matters and facts matter, and whether or not Thomas Jefferson truly said it, a well-informed citizenry is the best defense against tyranny. And if we do not believe in facts, we can be easily led into tyranny. So it's up to us to stay alert, to stay awake, to be the bastions of truth. It's part of our practice of Satya. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to Ayurveda and Spirituality with Alakananda Ma. We hope today's exploration has ignited a spark of curiosity and insight within you. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to leave us a 5-star review and share it with a friend. For more enlightening discussions and practical wisdom on Ayurveda and spirituality, subscribe and join our Facebook group, Alundi Ayurveda. To allow us to continue sharing valuable content, consider donating to Alundi Ashram. The links will be in the show notes. Until next time, may you walk the path of Ayurveda with grace and embrace the light of spiritual wisdom in your journey.
Trayambakam yajamahe sugandhim pushtivadano